In the name of God, in whom we live and move and have our being. Amen. So how do you like that gospel? Jesus could be tough sometimes, but it's really fascinating and very informative to notice how and when and where and with whom that happens. From what I can tell, Jesus was a really good preacher. He certainly follows the number one rule of preaching. A good preacher should always comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. Comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. In fact, Jesus follows that rule so well, maybe he was the one who actually came up with it. You know, Jesus told a lot of stories in order to help people, all kinds of people, understand the things of God. And in all the stories that Jesus told, there were a lot of really fascinating characters. Some good, some bad, some tragic, and some just plain comic. I can't decide if the Pharisee in today's story is tragic or comical, but we'll get to that. So there are a lot of really amazing characters in the stories that Jesus told, but there are only a very few, a couple of times, really, when the characters in Jesus' stories are official religious types. And it's never good. It's never good. Now, as a member of the clergy, I'm not entirely sure what to make of all that. But really, it's never good. I guess it's just that the people who think they get it the best of all actually get it the least of all. An occupational hazard, perhaps. So the two examples that spring immediately to mind for me are the story of the Good Samaritan and today's gospel story. In both of these parables, Jesus contrasts fine, upstanding, religious-type people with folks who would have been marginalized and disdained by members of that culture and society. And Jesus flips the script. He flips the script by making the fine, upstanding religious types the bad guys, or at least not the good guys, and by holding up those who would have been marginalized and looked down upon as shining examples of the goodness and compassion of God. So, a couple of things. First of all, both of these parables are told by Jesus only in the Gospel of Luke. Luke's Gospel has what I would even call a primary emphasis of bringing those who are marginalized into the center. Bringing those who are marginalized into the center. That's very important because it's a key inclination of the compassion and mission of our loving God. And of Jesus, who came to teach us about the compassion and mission of God. Second, no wonder the religious authorities ended up conspiring with the political authorities to try to destroy Jesus. No wonder. They knew who he was talking about when he told these stories. He was talking about them. And they knew it. They knew it. Anyway, as you know, in the parable of the Good Samaritan, the fine, upstanding religious types, the priest and the Levite, walk by on the other side of the road, leaving for dead a poor man who had been attacked and beaten up by robbers. Along came a Samaritan, a social and religious outcast to the folks of Jesus' day. And it was the Samaritan who reached out with kindness and compassion to tend the wounded man. The Samaritan reached out with the love of God, and the allegedly religious types did not. Did not. In today's gospel story, Jesus contrasts a Pharisee with a tax collector. The Pharisees were, of course, very observant Jewish religious people, leaders of the people, actually, who took great care to follow the Hebrew law to the smallest jot and tittle and detail. Every last detail. Every last time. The tax collectors, on the other hand, were Jews who worked with Palestine's Roman occupiers to extract taxes from their own people. And they usually extracted a little extra for themselves on the side. And sometimes they extracted a lot extra for themselves on the side. Tax collectors were deeply despised and hated by everyone. And so Jesus tells the story of these two people going to the temple to pray. The Pharisee, we're told, took up his position, probably up front, don't you know? And he proceeds to tell God what a great guy he is. He's following all the rules. He's doing all the right things, all the right way, all the time. He's not at all like everyone else, he says. I'm not like the rest of humanity, God, and I'm certainly not like this lowlife tax collector that you have here. What a buffoon, right? A comic, tragic character, to be sure. Now, how do you suppose God would have been looking at this pompous Pharisee? Like, dude, are you for real? Seriously? You call that a prayer? You call that a prayer? So the Pharisee insists that he's not at all like the tax collector, which is really too bad, because the tax collector is the hero of the story, at least according to Jesus. This tax collector comes before God with deep humility. He doesn't dare approach or even look up. He knows he's a mess. He knows how much he needs God, needs God's mercy, needs God's love and compassion. With downcast eyes and downcast spirit, he prays, "Please, be merciful to me, God. I'm a sinner. I'm sorry." And implicit in that prayer, though I'm a sinner, I trust your love and compassion, God. I trust your love and compassion even for me, a sinner. And he went home justified, Jesus says. But the other guy, not so much. Not so much. Didn't God have love and compassion for the Pharisee? Of course, of course. But the Pharisee didn't seem to know that. He didn't seem to know anything about the love and compassion of God. Because his actions show that he thought he had to earn it. He thought he had to earn God's love. He thought he had to show God and prove to God that he was worthy of God's love and compassion. That's why he followed all those rules so carefully. That's exactly why. And perhaps worst of all, he thought that somehow he could make himself bigger and better by making another person smaller and worse. The only one who became smaller and worse in this story, according to Jesus, was the Pharisee. It was the Pharisee. The pompously praying Pharisee left the temple in worse shape than he came in. On the other hand, the tax collector was flooded with the love and compassion of God, and he went home justified, Jesus says. But the other guy, not so much. Not so much. It's also worth noting, I think, that the prayer of the Pharisee, the prayer in which he insists that he's not a sinner like everyone else, is a sin. His prayer is a sin because he uses it to knock down and demean another human being. Another human being who God just happens to love more than the entire universe. Doesn't God also love the Pharisee more than everything in the entire universe? Of course. Of course. But the only one who doesn't seem to know that is the Pharisee. Is the Pharisee. So remember, as unsettling as it might be, especially for all of us churchy folks, the people who think they get it best of all often get it the least of all. Watch out for those occupational hazards, my fellow churchy people friends. A little humility goes a long, long way. especially with God. A little humility goes a long, long way. And so, with Jesus as my preacher, teacher, and example, I hope this morning I was able to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable, at least a little. And either way, I'm sure that we will all go home justified by the love and compassion of our infinitely loving and compassionate God. Amen.